currently trending in the almost 200s, and I had to go back to my old ratios because now that like I'm past whatever this insulin sensitivity weirdness was, like past couple days I've been like higher, but today like haven't gone as high, but still higher than I'd like, so I'm slowly transitioning myself back to where I was. Yesterday I rode above 200 for like 4 hours, and let me tell you, I didn't feel good, but just a little reminder that sometimes diabetes isn't going to behave, and I pushed a ton of insulin and it didn't like budge, but then I finally got it to budge, and I made the judgment now when I get like blood sugars that won't budge, I put out a temp basal in addition to pushing microboluses of insulin, and that seems to help bring my highs down pretty quick for me. So hopefully this will start turning around soon, but I've had worse, and I've definitely had better. So anyways, with that being said, let's jump into today's video. Hey everyone, it's Maddie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I am back with Diabetes Dictionary 102. So I'm going to define 31 more diabetes related terms. For those of you that didn't watch Diabetes Dictionary 101, I do have a playlist titled Diabetes Dictionary, so you can go check that out if you'd like. I believe I defined 31 other different diabetes terms, so I came up with another 31 combined from some of you guys who commented about different diabetes terms that I've learned, terms that are used around a lot in the diabetes community, and their meanings behind them. So with that being said, let's get right into the definitions. So the first one I have here on my list is Diabulemia. Diabulemia is a real thing. There are some people that say that, oh, this isn't a real eating disorder, this isn't a real thing. Yes, it is. Diabulemia is when people in particular have type 1 diabetes, reduce the amount of insulin they take or stop taking insulin altogether in order to try to lose weight. And basically it puts them in a state of continuous high blood sugars and continuous ketone buildup, so that it forces their body to burn their own fat to lose weight. But at the same time, they are hurting their body by damaging blood vessels and could cause diabetes complications to their heart and do a lot of damage in the short term and also in the long term if they're not careful. This is a real thing, and I'm going to link a channel down below. Sarah Von Urban talks about her experience with diabulemia that she's recovering from and having to deal with right now, and I really love her channel. She's been diabetic for a handful of years now, and I just appreciate that she's putting light on this because it's not really discussed about, and it can happen, and any type 1 diabetic can fall into the diabulemia trap, especially young teenage girls who think that like they're not beautiful with their weight, or they think they're fat, or they think that they're not a healthy weight. Let me tell you, I have some fat on me, and I'm fine with that. It's healthy. I'm not upset that I have a little bit of fat that hangs from my arms, okay? That's healthy. You want your body to be in a healthy state, and I have healthy blood sugars because of it. And I take care of myself, and I don't deny myself insulin, but some people go through diabulemia, and it's a struggle, and it's nothing really that, they did. They just saw it as a very easy way to kind of just fall into that trap to lose weight. And I think if a lot of doctors and a lot of other people would recognize that this is an eating disorder, that people who are suffering from diabulemia can get the help that they need and get the counseling that they need and get the support system that they need, because it's a thing. It's a real thing. And just check out Sarah Von Urban's channel. She just came back, and one of her first videos recent videos was talking about this, and I really appreciated that she put light onto this. So that's a quick basic definition of diabulemia. Number 2 is diabetes burnout. And this is a term that, we all kind of fear this, I guess. It's just like basically not giving a SHIT about diabetes and just letting it do its thing, and you're not taking your insulin, or you're not taking enough insulin, or you're guessing your blood sugars, you're not doing appropriate carb counting to the best of your ability, you're not checking your blood sugars, you're just letting them run high, or you just don't care what they look like, or if you're running a roller coaster, or you're over-treating lows, over-correcting highs, you're just like sick and tired of dealing with diabetes, that you're so burnt out with having to deal with it that you go into this period where you just don't have an I don't care attitude. And again, like diabulemia, this is a real thing that people can go through, and I think we all go through cases where like you feel burnt out, but then most of us, not most of us, but I know like myself, like I spring right back and say, hey, you need to take care of yourself if you want to live a happy and healthy life. Like yesterday I had a lot of highs, but there was a point where I was just like, I don't give a shit what's going on, or I don't give an shit what's going on. But I came to the point where, yes, you need to get this high down and you need to start, do all the proper things. And I did, and eventually came down, and it's temporary. And you have to understand that, like, it's a hard disease to fight, but you can't let it overtake you. And that's a huge thing. But diabetes burnout is real. And at one point or another, we'll all experience it, whether it be like me and you've experienced short-term frustration. And there are some of you that have done it or have had diabetes burnout for years and are trying to come back and take control of your health and take control of your diabetes management. And there are some of you that have shared your stories and said, I wish I could turn back the clock, and if I could turn back the clock and not let my blood sugars continuously run high, I wouldn't be in this situation. I wouldn't have numbing in my feet. I wouldn't have to get injections in my eyes. I wouldn't have to be on dialysis. I wouldn't have to be seeing a doctor all the time, because my heart isn't as in good as condition as it was. My body isn't where it was. And if you could turn back the clock and undo it, I see a lot of you would. And I learn a lot from you guys like that, that have had it for years or who haven't taken the best care of your diabetes or have been in a long-term burnout. And, I really appreciate for sharing your stories and the hard side of diabetes, because it really can affect you and it can really cause damage. And if you've experienced diabetic complications and you're on Beyond Type 1 or Instagram sharing that, thank you, because you're opening up a world not only to me but to tons of other people who may be in a burnout. You're showing that you support them and that you care and that you understand where you're coming from, but you need to start taking charge of your health or you're going to end up having problems, or you could have problems, and that you need to worry about each day and focus the best you can on your blood sugars and get them down so that you can live a healthy life possible. Number 3 is looping. Looping is just a basic term for people that have their own developed DIY pancreas or artificial pancreas system, where they have, for example, people have hacked into Omnipods and old Medtronic pumps and have them hooked up to a Dexcom G6 or a Dexcom continuous glucose monitor, and they build an app on their smartphone from a laptop that basically allows them to kind of manage their blood sugars on an artificial pancreas system. Now, I know the Omnipod Dash will eventually be getting to this state, but basically Loop allows, it monitors the blood sugar and communicates with an insulin pump and says, hey, her blood sugar is trending high. Let's dump more background insulin and try to bring this high down, or not let the blood sugars go dangerously high. Whereas like right now, you see that my blood sugar is a little higher. Well, I have to tell the pump, hey, I need a temp basal. I'd like a temp basal to see if I can naturally bring this high down. Whereas Loop automatically does that. Or like if you might be trending down, or like if you're in a grocery store, no matter what you do, if you don't suspend your insulin, you're going to go low. Well, Loop would recognize, hey, her blood sugar's dropping. It's trending down. There may be a low. Let's suspend the insulin to try to prevent a low or make that low less severe, if that makes sense. So Loop is kind of like an artificial pancreas, in which like a non-diabetic pancreas works. If it notices, hey, the blood sugar's a little low, let's secrete some glucagon or stop insulin production to kind of keep that blood sugar as normal as possible. Or like, hey, this person, I just ate a whole piece of cake, their blood sugar's trending up, let's secrete a bunch more insulin to try to not let that blood sugar go dangerously high, or not let that blood sugar go dangerously high. So that's what looping is. A lot of people do it. I'm not against it. And I think it's a neat thing, and if I can get my hands on how to do it and I get the tools to be able to do this, and somebody figures out a hack into the Dash system, I might try it. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. Just like anything else, being on an insulin pump, being on injections, being on a continuous glucose monitor, there is the risks and there are benefits, but I think the benefits far outweigh the risks of looping. I did talk about this in my 200 Q&A subscriber video, so if you want to go check that out, that would be under my playlist Get to Know Me. And I kind of share, somebody asked the question like, are you interested in looping, or have you considered it? And I think I kind of shared pretty well back in that video, kind of my opinion on it. Number 4 is rebounding. This is when a blood sugar usually is low and you overtreat it and it shoots really high, or you rebound from like not pre-bolusing enough or not counting carbs and your blood sugar just goes. And I'm going to show you on my graph today what a rebound looks like. I went out and exercised to try to bring down a blood sugar that was like in the 160s. And then my blood sugar was heading down super quick. So what I did was ate one pack of Skittles, not even like the mini pack. And I thought I would just level the blood sugar off. Well, my diabetes today had a mind of its own. And you could see, rebounded right back up to the same level. So it happens. Rebounds usually can be prevented if you can minimize your lows. But sometimes, like I said, I only ate like 14 carbs to stop a blood sugar of 102 going straight down, okay? And I ate 14 carbs. That's a standard, or that's a standard I typically use when I see a straight arrow headed down, and normally it levels right off for me, or I'll level off like 110, 120, 130. Nope, it went right back up to 160. So that's a rebound. It happens. One of those things where you're probably going to feel the rebound because you might get a headache from the quick change in blood glucose levels, but it's something that happens, and it's something that a lot of people use the term rebound to describe this. Number 5 has 3 different terms. Some people call it crashing. I like to use the term free falling, and there's also a term bottom out. That is when your blood sugar sits high and you just... Now, I only really see this when I take a high blood sugar. Like if I'm sick and tired of sitting at 200, I'll take an injection along with running a temp basal on my pump. And I will force this is a very, very advanced technique that the Juice Box podcast talks about. So I'll sit down and talk about how you can do this in a safe manner. I will put my blood sugar into a free fall. Basically, I'm going to take that 250 or that 200, and I'm going to force that blood sugar to start dropping quick. And then when I see that my blood sugar is nearing a low level, like say 75, I'll have a couple grams of sugar, like a couple glucose tabs, a half a juice box, and flatline it at a healthy blood sugar between 70 and 90. You can do this, but you have to be careful that you catch it at the right time. Otherwise, you're going to bottom out. You're going to crash and burn, and you're going to deal with a pretty severe low blood sugar. But it's kind of the opposite of a rebound. Instead of seeing your blood sugar go low to high, you're going to see it go from high to low. And the cases of using free falling or crashing techniques are really only advised if you have an insulin pump, or if you have enough experience about what your own body is and know your own insulin sensitivity factor, that you can make a good judgment with this. Like for me, when I put my blood sugar into a free fall, I don't take 10 units, okay? If my blood sugar is at 250, I take the appropriate amount of insulin I need to get down to a blood sugar of 100. So that would be, for me, that would be like 2 units. I would take about 1.5 units, but then I would put an increased temp basal on to try to get things rolling quicker, and then you could actually see it go and start dropping. This technique can be used at really dangerous high blood sugars. It works. You can even do this with intramuscular injections. Give yourself a shot in the muscle, and it'll plummet that blood sugar really quick. Again, these are advanced techniques. I am not a doctor. I am not responsible for what happens to you, but this is the term when you hear the word crashing, free falling, bottoming out. This is probably what a diabetic is referring to or is trying to describe to you with this term. Number 6 is flicking, and that's just something that we do like either on an insulin pen, or for me, when I change my Omnipods, I'm flicking that pod syringe so that I can get all the air bubbles out. And some people flick their syringes before they give themselves an injection with the syringe. I also do this. On insulin pens, you really don't need to flick. The only time I've flicked is if I've seen like bubbles floating around in the pen. I'll just flick to kind of get the bubbles to come out so that I'm not going to accidentally inject myself with air, because air is not going to do you any good at lowering or keeping blood sugars from going high. So flicking is another term. Number 7 is roller coaster, and this is just to describe blood sugars that have been all over the place. Low to high, high to low, low to high, up, down, yeah. I look like a zigzag pattern. I'm a little bit of a roller coaster today. Not too horrible. Yesterday was worse, but a little bit. You could see, yoop. But yesterday was worse. It was more, for me, it was like, it was really a roller coaster. Where you're literally like, you can see on like a continuous glucose monitor graph, you can go like, oh, I'm heading up. Oh, here comes the insulin. We're going to come down now. Oh, I'm dropping too quick. Catch that low. Oh, we're going back up again. It literally looks like a roller coaster. It's a term. And when you have blood sugars at roller coaster, you're not going to feel very good because your body can't catch on, or it's just going to mess everything up. That's why eliminating them roller coasters is ideal. To eliminate a roller coaster is to not overtreat lows, not overtreat highs or overcorrect highs, and to properly carb count so you can take the appropriate amount of insulin, use pre-bolusing, use your temp basals to help you out, whatever you need to do to keep those spikes and keep those roller coasters from running around. Number 8 is zombies. If you're a type 1 diabetic, sometimes you say, I'm a zombie today, or, you know, geez, I woke up and I'm a zombie this morning because I spent 3 hours last night trying to correct a high blood sugar that just would not come down to shut my CGM alarm off. Or I stayed up 3 hours trying to treat a stubborn low that would not come up for the life of me. Sometimes us type 1 diabetics can be like a zombie. And people that don't have diabetes probably are like, oh, it's not so bad to be a type 1 diabetic, or, oh, it's not exhausting, it's not tiring. No, if you were in our shoes and literally had to feel what we go through, some days we feel like zombies, like we're just, you know, I have to get up, just like all y'all, I got to get up every day and live a life. And that comes with living with the disease, that some nights you're not going to sleep. I've had that even going to school where, like, I've been up or only gotten 3 hours of sleep, but I'm up and in clinic and I'm doing my stuff. Life goes on, and you're going to feel like a zombie for a little bit, but to me, the best cure for a zombie, a zombie problem is either A, make sure you go to bed early enough, or B, drink some caffeine to temporarily hold you off, and C, if you need to take a nap when you don't have anything to do, go ahead. Because it's exhausting dealing with a disease like this, because you are literally a full-time pancreas. So I thought I'd define zombie for you guys in terms of diabetes. Number 9 is Diaversary. This is the day that you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Typically, most of us are diagnosed probably in the ER and DKA, although some of you were probably diagnosed just at a random doctor's visit and had no symptoms. Some of you maybe have caught it early. Some of you may have just been in a regular doctor's office and then they send you to the emergency room. But Diaversary refers to the day that you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and the day your life forever changed. And you took on the role of being your own pancreas and your own, managing your own insulin and blood sugar levels. That day for me was July 22nd, 2018. So I've been living with type 1 diabetes for just over a year. If you want to comment down below what your Diaversary is, I'd be more than happy to look at that, because I think that's fascinating that we all, like, that day sticks out in our heads so, you know, like a star shining, and I just, like, boom, like you could pull that date right out of the top of your head, and, like, I'll never forget that day, and that date will never be forgotten. I also won't forget it because 1 year later, diabetes nearly killed me from throwing up, okay? And I was not going to go in the ER again. And July 22nd for me is probably just a weird day, and I'm kind of freaked out for what next year's going to be. But anyways, that's what Diaversary is. Number 10 is Diabuddy. This is refers to anybody who is a diabetic and who's your friend. They can be from online, they could be people you meet in person, they could be people you meet from support groups, but it's anybody else who also shares the same condition that lives with you. Now, I happen to have 2 family members that also could be considered this. So anybody who lives with type 1 diabetes, and I know, like, now, like, if I'm out in public and I see somebody with, like, a Libre or, like, a pump on, I'm like, hey, I have diabetes too, like, cool, like, this is neat, you know, like, it makes you feel less alone when you've got somebody that can relate and share all the experiences that they've been through, and it's just an amazing thing to have a community that supports you and that you can give support back to. And that's truly what makes living with this disease a lot easier, is knowing that, like, you're not alone, and that there are other people out there that are dealing with highs and lows regularly too, and understand your struggles with insurance, fighting insurance, or getting access to this or that, or, you know, failed technology, or, oh crap, I over bolus and ended up bottoming out, or whatever the case may be. They can relate so hard to that and understand what you're coming from. Number 11 is carbs. This is just a shortened form for carbohydrates. When we're counting carbs, it's what we're meaning. When you look at a nutritional label, for those of you that don't have diabetes, when we are taking into consideration how much insulin we take, if you are our carb counter and use that, we're looking for total carbohydrate. And if it says 20 grams, then you can know, based upon your insulin to carb ratio, how much insulin you need to cover for that amount of carbohydrate. For me, I would need 2 units. For some of you, you may need 4 if you're on a 1/5 carb ratio, or if you're on a 1/15, you might only need 1.5 units, and you're on a 1/20 carb ratio, you would only need 1 unit to cover for that. So that's what carbs are. And carbs are anything that has sugar in it, and things that have carbohydrates like breads, pastas, cakes, and cookies all have carbs. Some vegetables have carbs, fruits have carbs. There's a lot of things that have hidden carbs that you wouldn't even think about. Bread, great example. Potatoes, great example. But we have to be able to measure or carb count or look at labels to get an idea of like, hey, this is how much insulin I need to metabolize this many grams of carbohydrate. Number 12 is standard deviation. This is how much your blood sugar kind of fluctuates. And it gives an idea of how much your blood sugar is actually roller coaster. So like on a continuous glucose monitor, they give you this, but I'll open up my SugarMate app and show you like my standard deviation right now. It's probably not very good. But over a 90-day period, mine's about 32. And ideally your standard deviation should be, let me see if I can get this correct. It should be, average blood sugar is, like my average blood sugar is 123, so ideally my standard deviation should be at or less than 60, which is kind of high, but my standard deviation is plus or minus 33, so meaning that, like, you know, with, you know, my blood sugar could vary, you know, like say my blood sugar is 100, my average blood sugar for today was 135 plus or minus 33. So my blood sugar today has probably been as high as about 180 something or 170 something, and the lowest it has been today has been about 100. So that's kind of how you can interpret standard deviation. The higher that number is, that means the more your blood sugars look like this. The lower the number, the more flatline they look. And let me tell you, the lower you can get that standard deviation, the better. For people that are on low carb diets, they aim to be less than 20. That's kind of tight. But I would say, in terms of you're like me and you eat a lot of low carb stuff, but you also like to bolus for some heavier carb stuff, I would say stay by that rule. Like, stay whatever your average blood sugar is. If it's like for me, it's 123, make sure you're less than 60. If your average blood sugar is 200, make sure that your standard deviation is at or less than 100. So I'm doing super good, considering that my standard deviation is 1/4 my average blood sugar, basically, if you want to think about it like that. So that's another indication of how you're doing with diabetes management. And they actually say it may be even more of a predictive or indicative tool on how someone is managing type 1 diabetes versus an A1C, which an A1C, like I said, could be falsely high or low depending upon how your blood sugars have been acting, because if you've had a lot of highs and a lot of lows, they kind of cancel each other out and you could still end up with a grade A1C. Again, I talked about this in one of my T1D with Maddie episodes, so go ahead and check that out if you want. I did a heads up what's more important, A1C or good A1C or standard deviation, or what's more important, time and range, standard deviation. I kind of talked about that, so go ahead and check that out if you'd like. Number 13 only applies if you have the Omnipod. This is PDM, which stands for Personal Diabetes Manager. This is the little remote controller, the little smartphone-like device that controls our pods. This is what we bolus from, do temp basals with. This is where we activate a new pod, deactivate a pod. We can also look up, at least on the Omnipod Dash, there's a food library. So if I wanted to look up carb counts for like French fries from McDonald's or from Chick-fil-A or whatever the case may be, I can do so right from my PDM, which is pretty awesome. But if you hear me use the term PDM or anybody else who has type 1 diabetes, they are probably on the Omnipod system and use a personal diabetes manager as their little remote control or the brains of their insulin pump to deliver their insulin for them automatically. Number 14, I'm feeling low. Now, when somebody says I'm feeling low, a non-diabetic would be like, oh, why are you so sad? No, when I mean I'm feeling low, I mean I'm probably shaking, sweating, heart pounding, vision's going funny. My blood sugar is probably low. So then at that point, I'll either look at my monitor or I'll check my blood sugar and confirm it actually is low and then treat it if necessary. And number 15 to go along with that is I'm feeling high or I'm high. No, we are not high on marijuana or any of the other illegal drugs that sit around out in the world, okay? Well, marijuana could be legal depending on where you live, so let me correct myself. When we say we're high, it means that we're not talking about drugs like marijuana or heroin or crack, okay? When we're saying high, it means we're feeling high, meaning our mouth's dry. Like right now, I got a dry mouth. Blood sugar's in the 190s. Our eyes might feel dried out. We might feel tired. We might feel nauseous if we have ketones present. You just may feel not interested in things, and you may not feel like you want to do anything. That's what we mean when I feel high or I am high. And highs are draining. They can affect you just as much as a low blood sugar as far as how you're feeling. And that's what we mean by that. We're not talking about we're high on drugs or we're high on this. Yeah, what we're high on is sugar, okay? That means that we don't have enough insulin in our body right now to keep our metabolism going for carbohydrate metabolism and blood sugar regulation, so we need more insulin. So that's what we mean by I feel high. Number 16 is prime or priming. This is what you do to kind of get the air bubbles out. When you're on multiple daily injections and if you use insulin pens, they tell you to dial to 1 or 2 to push a little bit of insulin out so that you get all the air out of the needle and out of the top of the insulin pen so that you're not injecting yourself with air. When you're on an insulin pump, if you're on a tube pump, I believe part of the process of you actually filling your cartridge or your reservoir is priming the tubing so that you don't have big air bubbles in your tubing, because if you have a big air bubble in your tubing, you could be missing several hours of basal insulin, and that could cause a lot of high blood sugars. When you're on the Omnipod, priming occurs when you fill the pod with insulin, and it does all that clicking. It'll say checking pod, priming, it's doing a bunch of safety checks, and the pod kind of clicks and it kind of settles that insulin down into the reservoir so that there's no bubbles. That's one thing I absolutely love about the Omnipod is it self-primes. But I try to make it as easy on it as possible by flicking my syringe or pushing a little bit of those bubbles out of the top so that I don't give myself a big air bolus, because that's not going to do anything for you. Number 17 is Glucagon. This is the emergency, what you could consider an EpiPen for a diabetic, although it's not as simple to use as an EpiPen. They have recently come out with a nasal spray, and I know they're working on getting one made in a pre-filled pen where you don't have to mix the powder and the liquid to try to help somebody recover from a dangerous low blood sugar. But glucagon is the hormone that is the opposite of insulin. It tells your liver to release stored sugar from your bloodstream. And this is used in the case of a type 1 diabetic when, like me, if I was throwing up so much and I couldn't hold anything down, I could have to use glucagon to try to keep my blood sugars back up. If, like in the case when I had the Chinese food, like if no matter what I ate or drank, my blood sugar would not come up, I would have used the glucagon. If I got so irritable and so uncooperative that I refused to eat or drink anything, or for whatever reason could not physically eat or drink anything to treat a low blood sugar, and at that point glucagon would be used. It's an injection given into the muscle, and it works within probably, I think, 10 to 15 minutes, and it also is used for somebody who is unconscious from a low blood sugar, because at that point they can't eat or drink anything. And it allows their liver to release stored sugar back into the bloodstream so that it can counteract the insulin and get the person's blood sugar back up so that they don't die of a low blood sugar or have a seizure or go into a coma or cause bodily damage. Glucagon is extremely important for a type 1 diabetic to carry around. As a matter of fact, mine just expired, so I will be refilling mine quite quickly here. It's a good safety net. You hope you never have to use it, but I have my expired kit now, so maybe I'll do a video on how to actually use glucagon and maybe do some reenactments and scenarios of when it's important for a non-diabetic person to recognize, hey, this person may need glucagon. Always keep a couple people in your family up to date on how to use it and review it with them if you need to, because in the event that you're not going to be able to take care of yourself or you're not going to be able to take care of your own low blood sugar, they need to know how to take care of you so that you don't die from a low blood sugar. Number 18 is a term I use a lot, or a phrase I throw around a lot. It's worth a shot. It's worth a bolus. I say this a lot when I look at dessert or I look at heavy carb foods and I go, that's worth it. It's worth 7 units of insulin. This piece of cake itself is worth 3 or 4 units of insulin, depending on what size you're eating or whatever. But a large bolus for a smaller piece of food that's heavier in carbs, I often say, it's worth the bolus, it's worth the shot, it's worth the units, it's worth something, okay? You may hear this thrown around for a lot of diabetics, especially like type 1s in which that our own diet did not induce diabetes. We can have anything we want as long as we know how to appropriately handle it and bolus for it. Number 19 is flatliner, or what I like to call diabetic extreme. That is when you look at your continuous glucose monitor and you have your gray range and your blood sugar's flatlined in between your target range. And when you have days like that, you feel amazing. And you often wonder, what did I do right today to make my blood sugar flatline? If I'm eating certain meals that I know are safe for me that do have carbohydrates, and I know the appropriate pre-bolus and the appropriate insulin dose that I need for it, I've actually seen it where my blood sugars And the insulin and the carbs have met so perfectly that my blood sugar sits at 90 and flat for like 3 hours. And it's like just the neatest thing to see how perfect it is, and that there was no spike, and that I was able to match things perfectly. It's a neat thing to see that, and it's a neat thing to feel that way and feel good when you see flatlining blood sugars. You don't want a flatline around a heart machine, but for blood sugars, you don't want your blood sugars to look like a heartbeat. You want your blood sugars to look like a flatlined machine. So you want to see that. Number 20 is meter or BG machine. This is just our little meter that we carry around that we put a test strip in, prick our finger or prick our palm or wherever you take your blood from, put a little sample on, and it'll tell us our blood sugar in about 5 seconds. Is it high? Is it low? Is it in range? Out of range? Whatever. They're often used in conjunction with a continuous glucose monitor like me. I have a Dexcom G6. If I didn't think that 187 was a good blood sugar for me, I would, test on a meter and make sure it's working. And I also use my meter twice a day. I test my fasting blood sugar always just to see, like, do I need a major change in my overnight basal? And number 2, I test it before I go to sleep because I want that comfortability knowing that am I going to bed at a decent level. And it allows to make sure that my continuous glucose monitor is accurate. And when I test, compare it up to my Dexcom G6, the fact that they're super accurate and the fact that like my A1C mirrors exactly what I got at the doctor's office, it makes me feel very confident that I can trust this continuous glucose monitor regularly to bolus and dose from. So you all might feel different about that, but if you have a continuous glucose monitor like me, please be sure to carry a meter because sometimes I'll have this thing fade in and out of me, or it might have an error, it might just fail. Sensors can fail. And you're out and about and you want to eat something or you're not sure what your blood sugar is, you need to be able to test that. So keep one on you at all times. Number 21 is a term thrown around a lot, is Walmart insulin. Well, Walmart insulin, all it is regular human insulin and often N-insulin or MPH, which is intermediate insulin. This is insulin that is, I believe it doesn't require a prescription. Depending on where you're from, I don't think in the state of Wisconsin, I don't think you need a prescription for it. I'm not 100% sure though, but you could walk in and buy a vial of Humulin R or Novolin R and NPH or Humulin N or Novolin N insulin for $25 a vial. This is not the same as the analog insulins like Humalog, which is what I pump with, or Novolog. They're not as rapid acting. They more mirror better of a person who's on like a Dr. Bernstein's diet or a very, very low carb diet or eats a lot of heavy protein for most of their energy. Those better mirror what their body's looking for. Walmart insulin is good in a pinch if like you have a high deductible or high copay where you can't pay for insulin, but it's not a solution to the insulin crisis we have here. But when somebody's talking about, oh, just get Walmart insulin, it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And I know if I was to use it, I would have to restrict the amount of carbs that I ate significantly in order to maintain the blood sugars I like. So most people now have access to either Humalog or Novolog, which are rapid-acting insulins that work really quickly, have a shortened lifespan, and just do a better job at being able to align heavier carb meals and blood sugars and not let them go dangerously high. So number 22 is retinopathy, and this is just damage to the blood vessels in the back of the eye, in the retina. And when this happens, it's not good, and that's one of the diabetic complications. It basically has everything to do with the blood vessels failing in the back of your eye, caused from high blood sugar, scarring all that tissue in the back of the eye. Actually, what they do, I hope to be doing a visual for this to you guys, what high blood sugar does as far as what it looks like in your blood vessels. But retinopathy has everything to do with either you have such high blood sugars that it scarred the heck out of the blood vessels that sit in the retina of the eye, that your body will start making new ones, and these new ones are weak and can bust and cause all kinds of problems at the back of your eye, and then eventually you could go blind or have high eye pressure or lead to glaucoma. That's what retinopathy is. It's a diabetic, one of the many diabetic complications. Number 23 is neuropathy, which is losing feeling in any of from your nerve endings. Typically when you have diabetic complications, it will start in the extremities or the nerves that are smaller, the microvascular nerves. Basically nerves, in order to get energy, they need blood flow. And when you have high blood sugar, that kind of blocks the nutrients from getting to the nerves that they need, and then they start dying. And then they'll start usually at your fingertips and the toes and the extremities and start working their way up. And it actually can work so far up to where you can damage major nerves like the vagus nerve, which controls your heart and your stomach. And that's what can lead to gastroparesis. It can lead to heart attacks, strokes, whatever. So neuropathy is another one of the many diabetic complications that can happen. I did do a video all about diabetes complications way back in November for Diabetes Awareness Month, and I explained these pretty well. So if you want to go check that out, go ahead. And the 25th definition I have on here is nephropathy, which again is your kidneys. Has everything to do with if your kidneys aren't getting the nutrients that they need to filter all the toxins out of your blood, your kidneys start shutting down. Your kidney, the functions of your kidney, your filtration units have all these little tiny blood vessels that allow them to get the nutrients they need so that they can filter all your toxins out of your bloodstream, like creatinine is a toxin. You don't want that building up in your blood. And they also prevent protein from spilling out into your blood. Well, if these little blood vessels have so much high sugar near them that they start getting damaged, guess what? The kidneys' filtration rates aren't going to get the nutrients they need, and therefore you're not going to be able to filter as many toxins from your urine and from your blood with your kidneys. So that can lead to nephropathy. This is one of the final things that can happen with diabetic complications, attacking your kidneys. So there's many other diabetic complications that can happen, but I just defined the 3 of them here. And if you hear these terms being thrown around, that's what they mean. Number 25 is milligrams per deciliter, which is abbreviated mg/dl. This is what many people use in terms to measure your blood sugar. It's how many milligrams per every deciliter of blood, or deciliter of blood that's present in your body. A deciliter is 1/10 of a liter. So if my blood sugar right now is 186 milligrams per deciliter, meaning that there's 186 milligrams, you're talking 1,000th of a gram of sugar present in my bloodstream for every 1/10 of a liter of blood, of liquid that I have present in my blood. This is high blood sugar. And normal is anywhere from 70 to 120 milligrams per deciliter. Normal fasting for a non-diabetic is anything less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. If you want to think about it in terms of like, what does 100 milligrams per deciliter look like? 100 milligrams per deciliter would be the equivalent of you having 1 teaspoon of sugar present in your body at one time. Having a blood sugar of 186 milligrams per deciliter, I have almost 2 teaspoons of sugar present in my blood. When I was diagnosed with a blood sugar of 513 milligrams per deciliter, I had about 5 teaspoons of sugar present in my blood. So the difference in between normal blood sugars and high blood sugars is about a teaspoon. Isn't that crazy to think about that? About a teaspoon. Being a teaspoon off can mean the difference between you being blind or not. Eventually, it can mean the difference of your kidneys functioning or not. It can mean the difference of your nerves being able to do what they're supposed to do or not. Number 26 is millimoles per liter. This is the other unit conversion for those of you that used to measure blood sugars in like England and Canada. They use millimoles per liter. I can't really put in a picture of what that looks like, but instead of using deciliters, you're using a whole liter. And millimoles would be another term of measurement. I'm not sure what a millimole would look like. I may do some research for you guys and figure out what that is. But to convert from milligrams per deciliter to millimoles per liter uses a smaller scale of numbers. We're like the equivalent of 70 to 120 milligrams per deciliter. 70 to 120 milligrams per deciliter is the equivalent of blood sugars between 3.9 and 6.7 millimoles per liter. So for them, anything over like 10 is high. So when you want to convert, if you want to go from milligrams per deciliter to millimoles per liter, like I give you guys here, I usually do a pretty good job for anybody that views my videos from not in like America or countries that don't use milligrams per deciliter. I usually do a pretty good job at converting my blood sugars for you guys. All I do is I take my blood sugar and divide by 18. So my blood sugar right now being 186 milligrams per deciliter is just over 10 millimoles, 10.3 millimoles per liter. To get from millimoles per liter to milligrams per deciliter, multiply by 18. So if my blood sugar in millimoles per liter is 10.3 multiplied by 18, that gets me to 185.4 milligrams per deciliter, or about 186 milligrams per deciliter. So that's how you use that. So if you use the term, if you people say my blood sugar is this many millimoles or this many milligrams, that's what we're talking about. That's the unit of measurement we use when we test our blood sugar, depending on where you're from and what you use for that. Number 27, bump and nudge. This is a technique that is an advanced technique that the Juicebox podcast talks about, but it is bumping and nudging your blood sugars before they get dangerously high or dangerously low. For example, if you notice that, hey, my blood sugar is 75 with a slight arrow headed down, you're not truly low at that point, but you might want to take if you take a half a juice box, you might be able to level that blood sugar off in the 80s eventually. You can't go crazy, but it's just nudging that blood sugar to prevent it from going low. You can also bump your blood sugars back down. I do this a lot when I notice my blood sugars. If I want to be bold with insulin, if my blood sugar hits my 140 level. Now you're talking about 140, Maddie, that's a great blood sugar. Yeah, it's a good blood sugar. There's nothing wrong with it. But when my blood sugar hits 140, for me, it's easier if I take a 0.6 to correct that. I've done this so many times now that I even know what the pump's going to give me. And it nudges my blood sugars back down real slow. Then for me to wait until my blood sugar gets to 200, have to take a dose of about a whole unit and watch my blood sugar start plummeting. Bumping and nudging allows you to use either small amounts of carbohydrate or small amounts of insulin to keep your blood sugar in a tight range. Bump and nudge, bump and nudge. It's what your body would naturally be doing anyway as a non-diabetic, if you were a non-diabetic. It's a great way to maintain as normal blood sugars as possible without, and the beauty of bumping and nudging is you're not really going to have a lot of roller coasters, or you're not going to have a lot of swinging and variation in blood sugar. Because if I take a 0.6 to drop a 140 down to 100, it's going to drop. But a 0.6 isn't that much insulin, so it's going to drop rather slow. If I take a 200 and try to drop it down to 100, I'm going to end up taking a little over a unit of insulin. There's a lot of variation that can happen with a unit of insulin, depending on what's going on, and that could result in a low blood sugar. Same with nudging up lows or bumping up lows. If you take a 75 with a slight angle headed down and you treat it with like a half a juice box, your blood sugar is going to rise, but it's not going to rise a lot. It might rise 20 or 30 or even 15, and that's just enough to get you back in the 80s or 90s and coasting perfect. Whereas if you take a 75 with a slight arrow headed down and maybe use a full 15 or 20 or 30 carbs, well, then your blood sugars are going to start heading up really quick, and then you're going to end up on that roller coaster. Great technique. I'm going to talk about these more in the future, just like I'm going to talk about how to exchange basal for bolus, and you can use this in your diabetes management. Number 28 is spike. When we say spike, it's usually just referring to the fact that our blood sugar went up, came down, and left a nice little mountain in our CGM graph, or when we pricked our finger, we saw it go, I started at 100, I rose to 170, and now I'm back down to 120. Spike up, come down. That's simple. That's what a spike is. Number 29 is a compression low. This happens when you have a continuous glucose monitor, like me, and you sleep on it. You can actually push so hard on the sensor that for whatever reason it forces like your interstitial fluid away from the little wire that sits under your skin to measure your readings continuously, and it can create a sense that it picks up on the monitor as, hey, her blood sugar is dropping. No, it's not. You just pushed all the fluid away, and if you're pushing the fluid away, you're also going to be pushing the sugar that could be present in that fluid away. I had this happening when I actually first put the sensor on. It woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning that I was 48 with double arrows headed down. I have learned overnight to not treat a low blood sugar unless I check, or I'll often roll back over on a different angle, release the pressure off of this, and very quickly it'll go right back up. You can usually tell on a graph, it'll kind of go like this, and you'll have a cliff dive. Good indicator that you had a compression low. These things do happen. They are false low blood sugars, and if you treat them, you could end up going really high. So it's a real thing, just like anything else. Take care of them. Recognize when they happen, and when in doubt, use your meter to check. Number 30 is honeymooning. This is the period of time in which your pancreas can still aid you in blood sugar management. This is when the immune system is still polishing off most of the cells. Now, the honeymoon phase happens shortly after you're diagnosed. Like mine kicked in pretty quick. And when I was honeymooning, I only needed Lantus or long-acting insulin for my blood sugar management, and then my blood sugar started running 200 to 300, 200 to 250 before meals, And at that point, I had to be reintroduced back to meal insulin. And ever since then, I've eventually gotten settled into a pretty consistent pattern of insulin to carb ratios and basal rates now. So when you're honeymooning, your blood sugars are going to fluctuate a lot, and you're probably going to have a ton of low blood sugars with minimal itty bits of insulin. You're going to be ultra insulin sensitive, and your values or your ratios for like carb counting or your ratios for basal rates are going to be low, or they're going to be all over the place. They're not going to be settled out. You know you're pretty well past your honeymoon phase when like you can take large amounts of insulin, like say over 4 or 5 units for a good sized meal and not go low. Also, when you know this is like with me, like my rates are pretty well set at a 1/10 and this much basal insulin for this and this much basal insulin for that. If you're pretty well settled in on your body for the most part, like you're out of your honeymoon. And also too, like being able, you can't eat really a lot uncovered. Like I remember when I was honeymooning, like sometimes if I miscalculated carbs and I didn't go as high as I thought I would have, well, the pancreas could have aided in some form of insulin production that way. But now, like, it seems like if I eat any little bit of thing, it's like, it's going to go right up if I don't take cover for it. So, it's a good shot that your honeymoon's over, but not everybody goes through a honeymoon phase. I would say a lot of people do, but not all. And there's also this theory that type 1 diabetics do retain the ability to produce insulin. It's just not enough to regulate blood sugars. And whatever little bit of insulin production you can maintain, I don't care if your C-peptide level is 0.5 or if it's 0.8 or if it's 0.2. Hold on to it as long as you can, I guess, right? Because if your pancreas randomly helps you out, let it help you out. And that might be the way that we might be able to cure diabetes or help prevent it, is to kind of like keep people in this honeymoon stage as long as possible so that their pancreas can aid and not get attacked anymore and not get destroyed. So honeymooning, that's what we mean by honeymooning. That's what doctors mean by honeymooning. That's the name they gave it, and it's a horrible name because honestly it throws so much denial at your face. And I've talked about this. I've made 2 videos on the honeymoon phase, so if you want to go check those out, go ahead. But I talked about my experience with it. I talked about what it is a little bit in brief. But it's kind of a taboo subject, and a lot of people really don't know a lot about it unless you go through it. And it kind of gives you this state of denial that you don't have diabetes, and it puts you in this state of like either I want to be diabetic or I don't, okay? Not like you want to be diabetic, but like for me, I was like either throw diabetes at me hardcore or don't even want to deal with it at all. It puts you in this limbo state, and I didn't really enjoy honeymooning. I shouldn't say I didn't enjoy honeymooning. I enjoyed not having to inject as much, but at the same time, it was just kind of like torturing to just sit and wait and watch your pancreas die in front of you. So, number 31, and the final term I'm going to define today, is diabetic coma. This happens when a person either has such dangerous high blood sugars or low blood sugars that it has caused so much damage to the point where they put themselves in a coma. I don't know at what point you can go into a diabetic coma for a low blood sugar, because I know some of you have shared your experiences that you've woken up at blood sugars in the 20s and have felt totally fine, and there are some of you that like get to 55 and you've passed out and had a seizure. So I mean, that can vary. I don't know at what stage you could go into a diabetic coma from a low blood sugar. High blood sugar can also vary, but I do know, like when I was in DKA, when I was first diagnosed, I know a lot of you have had your diagnosis blood sugars were higher than mine. Mine was 513. But the doctor in the emergency room told me that I probably would have been in a coma in a matter of hours, just because once you get above like 500, you're starting to get to the point where it can start damaging organs. My kidneys actually were shutting down. Like my filtration rate was starting to like drop. It wasn't like I was going to lose a kidney, but it was like they were starting to tank. And they were concerned mainly too that I would have been in a coma only because I was missing 6 liters of body fluid. So I think you could go into I think it's more like above 500 for sure. You can go into a diabetic coma with high blood sugars. And I definitely know when people have said, oh, your blood, are diagnosed with blood sugars in the 800s or 900s, or even some of you have told me your blood sugar was over 1,000 milligrams per deciliter. I'm surprised you weren't in a coma. You're lucky to be alive at that level. But any of us that are diagnosed with diabetes and DKA, like me, are lucky to be alive. But I feel like if your blood sugar is above 500 and you're not taking care of it, or you don't know that you have diabetes, you could induce a coma quicker. I don't know at what level it can happen for a low blood sugar, but I would say above 500 milligrams per deciliter or above 28.5 millimoles per liter. For those of you that use millimoles, that's kind of like, for me, that would be kind of like my level of thinking of like what can happen for diabetic comas for high blood sugars. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed Diabetes Dictionary at 102, and I hope you got some insight into some of my opinions, some pretty long definitions. This is going to be a long video, but I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, give this video a thumbs up. Feel free to hit that subscribe button down below. I post videos every single week about diabetes plus more, and until next time, for another video, take care, God bless, be kind, spread positivity, and be thankful. Bye, everyone.